here for an evening with a conversation with Angela Davis between Miss Amy Goodman. We got Miss Amy Goodman in the house. Democracy Now! I was over there being bodyguard for her, making sure nobody would mess with her, but, you know, she's holding it down. All right, so, first to the stage. Y'all ready for your first performance? Say, oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Say, oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
All right, so we have Sweet Honey on the Rock. Sweet Honey in the Rock. Sweet Honey in the Rock tonight. Let's run that back. We have Sweet Honey in the Rock tonight. Make some noise, y'all. So, let me tell you a little about them. They are an internationally acclaimed a cappella ensemble. They are a 3-time Grammy Award nominee. Make some noise for that. This amazing, talented group of women entertain, empower, and educate us all through dynamic vocals and a cappella singing and American Sign Language. So without further ado, everyone, make some noise right now for Sweet Honey in the Rock.
To be here. Angela Davis, Amy Goodman, Democracy Now! We are so honored to be here. So we're going to just get the spirit going here with a congregational song. How many of you all have ever seen Sweet Honey in the Rock and know you're supposed to sing? We're going to raise the group and keep the energy high. It's time to provide a cassette. Yo! Anyway, that's celebrated by Bernice Johnson Reagan. In these times, you know, I don't even need to say much. Y'all know what I'm talking about. It's just so crazy, but you have to raise your voice. You have to know how to resist. You have to keep it going and stay on the battlefield.
Yes.
So I'm going to stay.
Stay on the battlefield. I gotta record this one. This is from Friends. This is one of my favorites.
We shall not bow down to racism. We shall not bow down to injustice. We shall not bow down to exploitation. Oh, what you gonna do? I'm gonna stand. How you gonna stand? How you gonna stand? I'm gonna stand. I'm gonna stand. No, no, I just can't tolerate no racism. No, I just can't tolerate no injustice. No, I just can't tolerate no. What you gonna do? What you gonna do? How you gonna stand? How you gonna stand? I'm gonna stand. 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 Oh, what you gonna do? Oh, what you gonna do? What you gonna do? I'm gonna stand. I'm gonna stand. I'm gonna. I'm
Yes, let's give it up one more time for Sweet Honey in the Rock. Y'all need backup. I'm here all day. Yo, was that not amazing or what? All right, we got another performer coming up. Y'all ready for the next performer? Say yeah. Yeah. Say yeah. So we're gonna get a little spoken word in here. So we're gonna So we're gonna do this a little bit open mic style. So we're gonna this is an interactive space. So if you hear something that you like, we'll allow clap. You want to hear you clap? Beautiful. You know this thing called snapping. Let me hear you snap. We do a lot of this thing at the chocolate. We call it the Busboys chocolate at the roof of your mouth. That's a really hit you. Let me see it. And then you can even combine the with the snapping. Let me hear you do it. Then it's something really hitting your soul. You can even do a yes. Let me say yes. You gotta get a what? Let's keep it moving, y'all. All right. Next performance to the stage. Introducing the Beltway Slam team. Make some noise for them, y'all. They're the home of the 2014 National Poetry Slam Champions, award-winning performance and poetry slam group based out of DC with the home at Busboys and Poets, Brooklyn. Every last Tuesday of the month, you can catch them performing. Performing tonight from the team, we have Jael Benjamin, the 2018 DC Grand Slam champion, and Danielle Reed. Give it up, everybody.
Let's go, Beltway.
Hey, Danielle.
There's a southern girl from Alabama with a switchblade tongue talking about freedom. never learned how to be tamed or tongue-tied. Say she got an imagination as big as the American dream. And so woke, she spends her time asking for her money back. Cause the revolution we got was not the revolution we prayed for. There's a sister inside who took a sledgehammer to jaw and did not shatter. Instead became glass shard. They say the man must have figured out the meaning of freedom and lost it. No, seriously, lost it. Say he looked exhausted from trying to find the little black girl he never thought would be America's most wanted. But ain't it just like the man to theme for those who resist in classrooms, prisons, boardrooms, bathrooms, bedrooms, courtrooms? There's a panther clawing the unacknowledged backdrop to freedom. Say she marched down the street in March 2018 with raised fists and raised questions. Say she was grateful for the water on the way, but noticed the glass was half full. So she proceeded to the promised land versus waiting for unacknowledged, unfulfilled promises. There's a woman who we will not let die without giving her her roses, with our art, with our body, with our fists, with our teeth, with our voices. There's a feminist, womanist, humanist, who does not shut and jive but will dance to shake the dust. A woman made of dust and salt water, whose body is a revolution of flesh and existence. A woman who exists now in our memories and our legacies and our steel bones and clenched fists, whose spine formed levees that never break. She never breaks, walks with her head up, does not let oppression or gravity or politicians with skewed agendas pull her body into submission. A woman who loves despite everything. So today, we give you your roses. Get to smell them while the grass is still green. Wow. Thank you.
Y'all, give it up one more time. All for you, commemorative piece, just for you. We're also on Facebook Live, y'all. Say, hey, Facebook. Hey, Facebook. All this is happening for everyone to see. So, also, for everyone out there, if you can't find any seats, this should be projected out there to that main area, so I hope y'all can see me out there. So just feel free to also go out there for me to get some air. So without further ado, I want to introduce our next person to the stage. He is the founder and owner of Busboys and Poets. Artist, activist, just an amazing human and individual. So, without further ado, y'all, everyone, please make some noise right now for Amy Goodman!
Run, Andy, run!
Sweating already, so you can see. I wanted to stand out there in the rain because the line was going around the corner and all the way to the side, and I thought it's so unfair to have people be standing there and can't get in. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for those of you that had to wait for so long to get in here, but I just wanted to go out there and just get wet with everybody else. So here I am. It's such a joy and a pleasure to have all of you here. I have to say, this is, as you recall, our location was across the street. Right? It was at the corner there. And we were there for 10 years. And when we got here, there wasn't a whole lot going on here. So since we've been here, a lot has happened. You can look around and see. And when we came to our 10-year renewal of our lease, they wanted to raise the rent by 30%. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, it sounds a little familiar, right? You know, a lot of times we think of gentrification that impacts just regular, ordinary people. It also impacts businesses. Businesses that have been here for a long time in the city. And suddenly they're finding themselves having to be moved out and be, pushed to the margins. Well, luckily, we're able to find a space across the street. I mean, how often does that happen, right? And how often does a landlord take the risk of forcing you to make that decision because they know that a restaurant is not a shoe store. You can't just pick up the shelves and move across the street. You're basically stuck there. Well, we told them. We said, no, we're not going to stand for this. And we have a team here that really did the impossible. We were able to close on Memorial Day at 5 p.m. and reopen on Tuesday, the following day at 7 a.m. I think it's unprecedented. Honestly, I've been looking around to see if there's any business books that have been written about this, but this is not about business, it's about love. I think there's people sitting outside. We decided to open the window a little bit, so I apologize for the steaminess of the day. I know that the last time, if you recall, Angela, when you were here, there was another hurricane. You seemed to bring them with you. Yeah. And we absolutely love that. You bring the energy, you bring the intensity, you bring the amazing forces that come with that. And we are living in very strange times, aren't we? Yeah. Aren't we? And what's with Kanye what's with the bromance? You know, what is this bromance with his bro? I don't get it. I don't understand it. But hey, we live in very strange times. How many of you were there involved in the Kavanaugh hearings? You know, we're standing there in line, shouting and screaming, and suddenly what you thought couldn't possibly happen, right? I mean, they know how to do it, right? They know how to just force it down. But you know something? We need these types of gatherings in order to reassure ourselves that we are not alone, that everybody's here to help each other. I want you to put your hand on the back of the person next to you and give them a rub and say, I got your back. Not in a creepy way, in a nice way, okay? Just say, I got your back. Just turn to the person next to you and introduce yourself if you haven't already done so. We like to pride ourselves. I got somebody, got my back right here. I love it, thank you. That arm comes through the curtain. Whoa, this is good stuff. So, when we decided we wanted to come out here, we wanted to really kind of put this spirit into this space, spirit into the very foundation of this space, and I couldn't think of a better person to invite here to be part of this than Angela Davis. I'm so honored and so humbled to call her my friend. I want to welcome her to this space, this incredible space that has just become a lot more incredible suddenly. To her, I want to welcome Gina Dent, Dr. Dent here. It's a pleasure to have you as well here with us. Thank you so much for being here. And of course, I want to welcome Amy Goodman, the incomparable Amy Goodman. When I called Amy and I said, you know what? We have Angela Davis coming in here, and I'd love to have you do a conversation with Angela Davis on stage. She immediately called me back and said, I'd love to do it. And I want to give you a hand. Thank you so much. Thank you. You're such a joy, such a pleasure. And I'm honored to call you my friend. Thank you. Thank you for doing this. And of course, when I call Sweet Honey in the Rock, you know, they're incredible. They came from out of town, from different places, just to do this piece here for us today. And they are a force of nature, and someone I think that is has a strong history and strong foundation for the city. And I thought I couldn't have a place open up without Sweet Honey in the Rock. Adding a little bit Sweet Honey on the Rock too. Yeah. So we got all that. And of course, you know, the Beltway poetry. The Beltway poetry, you guys are geniuses. What can I say? You know, you really are. You know, they call you the future leaders, but you are the current leaders. You are the leaders that make this happen. So thank you. Thank you so much. So I know you're here to have a wonderful conversation. I want you to sit back. I want you to relax. I know it's warm. It's getting a little cooler out there. The rain has subsided a little bit, but I want you to just calm down and relax. We're going to have a wonderful conversation. And afterwards, we're going to do, we have some books that we have there that are signed, and we have some more books, and if Angela has the time to be able to stay and sign some books, it'd be wonderful. So we ask you to please take a deep breath, relax. I know everybody's, just getting here. It's taking a lot of energy today, right? There's traffic, and there's rain, and there's parking, and there's all this other stuff, so I appreciate all of you. I want to say also a very special birthday to our friend Yvonne. Happy birthday. Happy birthday, Yvonne. Yeah. Yvonne has been coming to our places, I think, for forever. She has a spot in our bar that is under her name. And it's wonderful to have you, Yvonne. Thank you. Happy birthday to you. I want to bring up to the stage, we have Angela Davis and Amy Goodman. I'm not going to introduce them because you know who they are. Thank you so much.
What an honor it is to be here with all of you. Andy, thank you for making all of your Busboys such a wonderful, warm community space. Busboys and Poets, the name that he bestowed on his places from Langston Hughes. It's all of you that make the space. It's not the space itself, but Andy's remarkable, beautiful aesthetic eye, not to mention his love of community. What a place to have this conversation. And to be here with this remarkable woman. For decades, she's been involved in every human rights issue there is. And we're going to go back to the beginning and bounce forward. I mean, I just came down on the train from New York City with my colleagues who are here, who are filming, Chris and John, and we thank them for documenting this. It's so important we document history, we document the great people who are there on the ground, not that elite punditry you get on the networks who know so little about so much, explaining the world to us and letting it so well. But on this ride I took down here, it was quite a journey because I just sat and watched Free Angela and All Political Prisoners on my little phone. I watched the documentary, and I encourage everyone to watch this amazing film. But the last time I got a chance to talk to you, Angela, we tracked you down your last morning, I'm sure you appreciated this, in Martha's Vineyard, right? It was in August. It was the day that Aretha Franklin died. So why were we looking for Angela? Because of their connection that hardly gets attention today, but I think says so much about both women. And I wanted to read a quote of Aretha Franklin, who told Jet magazine in 1970, "My daddy says I don't know what I'm doing. Well, I respect him, of course, but I'm going to stick by my beliefs. Angela Davis must go free. Black people will be free. I've been locked up for disturbing the peace in Detroit, and I know you gotta disturb the peace when you can't get no peace. Jail is hell to be in. I'm going to set her free if there's any justice in our courts, not because I believe in communism, but because she's a black woman and she wants freedom for black people. I have the money, I got it from black people. They've made me financially able to have it, and I want to use it in ways that will help our people. What did that mean to you at the time? Aretha Franklin saying, I want you free.
Hello. First of all, hello, Amy. And I really would like to thank Andy and Marjella for inviting me to be a part of the opening of this new Busboys. It's amazing that there is this sense of possibility in all of the gatherings here. I experience it whenever I come to DC and I see, all of the people who are here, all of you who are here at Busboys, who are serious about wanting to see a better world. Like Aretha Franklin was serious. One of the most moving moments I experienced during that time because, of course, Aretha had already provided the soundtrack of our lives. And I was just, so moved and so uplifted that that she was willing to pay my bail. But I should tell you, bail hadn't been set at that time. It's an interesting story. I was charged with 3 capital offenses, every single one of which was unbailable. And so at that time, I had some arguments with people who were organizing, who wanted to do a bail movement. And I'm sitting in jail, and I said, but I'm ineligible for bail. What's the point? But they proved me wrong, and people all over the world signed petitions, and then eventually, interestingly enough, the state of California temporarily abolished the death penalty. And my lawyers tried their best to get in touch with Aretha, but she was in the Caribbean at the time. And that was a different era. You're used to money, capital flowing with ease over national borders. There was no way that she could get the money to us in time. And so this white farmer by the name of Roger McAfee, who had a farm in Central California, showed up at my lawyer's office and he said, I'm willing to put up my farm. Wow. And the thing is, had I not gotten out at that moment, I wouldn't have gotten out on bail, because immediately the Supreme Court ruled that all capital offenses that were previously ineligible for bail would remain ineligible. And so there was this tiny window, and Aretha, by publicly announcing that she was going to pay my bail, made everybody listen. And so I like to think that it was Aretha, who bailed me out, and she did.
We have a terrible problem in this country, even with all of the media, with all of the channels. History gets erased so quickly, and I see so many young people here today. And I was wondering if you can tell that history, because each of the moments in your life were a political struggle, to say the least. I mean, we could, and we will go back even further to where you were born, to Birmingham, but since we're talking about this moment, 1969, Governor Ronald Reagan wants you thrown out of UCLA as a professor, as a teacher, because you're a communist and he wants no communist voice there. Is that right?
Yeah. center of attention in that way. I just wanted to teach philosophy. And probably had anyone told me that I would be fired by Ronald Reagan and that this huge uproar all over the country about the fact that a communist was teaching at UCLA. I mean, I thought the McCarthy era was over, you know? Because there was a period where if you were a communist, you were not able to teach, you were not able to make movies. You all know about the McCarthy era, right?
Few people.
I always say, even if you don't have actual memory, you can have historical memory. So this should be a part of our historical memory. Ronald Reagan. You know, it's so interesting that at these moments when people like Ronald Reagan were elected, when people like Richard Nixon, we never expected that it could possibly be any worse.
Yeah, that is true. We remember that.
George W. Bush, I mean, the current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue makes George Bush look a lot better than he looked at the time. And that's weird.
Before we go there, 1970, you're fighting as you fight today, more than 40 years later, against the prison industrial complex to free the Soledad brothers. And there's a shootout in the Marin courthouse, and that's what led to your charges. Today, Washington State Supreme Court overturned the death penalty in Washington State, making it the 20th state. But your experience, and I think a lot of young people may not realize this, comes out also of your own experience in jail and prison. You faced 3 death penalties, 3 death sentences.
Yeah. You know, Amy is a really good interviewer. Yeah, 1969, I was fired from UCLA, and that was a pretty difficult year. I got literally hundreds of death threats. I had to be ushered from classroom to classroom by the UCLA campus police. They had to start my car up to make sure there wasn't a bomb planted. And they ushered me to the edge of campus because they wanted to guarantee that I was not killed on the campus. I mean, that was really their role. And I say this because it meant that I had to have security 24 hours. And I had to have someone move into my apartment with me because I lived alone at that time. I just had to have someone, I had to have armed security 24 hours a day. And I purchased a couple of guns that were used by the people who were doing security for me. Particularly when I was speaking. I should say that around the same time, we learned about the case of the Soledad brothers, George Jackson, John Cushing, Frida Drongo, and began to do organizing in Southern California. There was a committee in Northern California to free the Soledad brothers. We created a committee in Southern California. And George's younger brother, Jonathan, who was an amazing, really beautiful young man who was an incredible writer. He wrote poetry. He was also deeply dedicated to his brother. And I give you all this information because at one point, Jonathan, who had been doing security for me, took those guns that I had bought for my security and went into the Marin County Courthouse. We're still not exactly certain what the plans were, but it seemed that that he was going to call for the freedom of his brother and the Soledad brothers. George was in Soledad at the time. He was in San Quentin at the time. They had been moved to San Quentin. And there was a trial happening in the Marin County Courthouse that involved a number of San Quentin prisoners. Jonathan went into the courtroom and brought the judge out with some of the jurors into a waiting van. And then, as we discovered during my trial, it was the San Quentin guards who opened fire, who were responsible for the death of the judge and the other prisoners and Jonathan. And it was horrendous. It was really horrendous. I can remember we examined some of the San Quentin guards during my trial and asked what their policy was with respect to escapes. And they said their policy was to prevent escapes at all costs. I mean, we were all very much aware of what had happened to Lil Bobby Hutton, an 18-year-old member of the Black Panther Party, when he tried to surrender to police and was killed. And it was really interesting, an interview, a study was done, a poll was taken of people in Los Angeles, in Black communities. And the question was whether they thought that I was doing the right thing by leaving. And it was like 90% said yes. Because they knew the Los Angeles Police Department. And they knew how many people had been killed by the police department. So, you know, it never even crossed my mind to turn myself in at that time. I was thinking that you know, maybe in a more auspicious moment, you know, maybe if organizing were done, and I mean, I didn't get to do that because the FBI caught up with me, and I was actually captured by the FBI, which was another story. But
In New York.
yeah, I was in New York. Well, I was actually running from the FBI because you know, people have this romantic idea about what it means to be underground. But, you know, in a sense, I was almost relieved because every time I saw a white man in a suit, I assumed it was the FBI. And if I had stayed underground any longer, I probably would have had a heart attack. So.
It's almost exactly 48 years ago, 1970. It was October that they got you, right? And put you at Bedford Women's Prison. Is that right? One of the places you were held downtown in the Village in New York City?
Yeah, it was a women's house with detention in Greenwich Village, yeah. Yeah, they took me, first they took me to the FBI's office. I mean, wow, I'm having to go back in my memory, 48 years. And I remember being on the elevator and knowing that they had had found us. I was traveling with a man by the who was actually really amazing, and he ended up being arrested, David Poindexter, and he finally beat the case. But I remember we were going up to the hotel room, and I remember thinking that this is it. I could sense that it was going to happen. And as soon as we got up to the floor, they grabbed me, they grabbed him, they snatched, I had a wig because I was in disguise, they snatched my wig off. And only time I've ever worn a wig in my life. And my brother saw a picture or something. He said, "That's not my sister." But they kept asking me, "Are you Angela Davis?" And I learned when I was a very young child not to talk to the FBI. You do not say anything to the FBI. I learned when I was 5 years old, when my parents' friends who were communists were underground, and the FBI would always try to get information from us, and I learned not to say a word to the FBI. So the only thing I did say to them eventually was that I want my phone call. But yeah, that was a pretty dramatic moment. Yeah.
So you're sitting in jail. They are going to fight for you to be extradited to California. You were fighting that, and then they just put you in a van and started moving you west?
Well, I was in jail for, I was arrested on October 13th. And I was in jail until November. So there are lots of stories that happened at the Women's House of Detention. They're really important stories because I think I learned there. It was the only time I was ever in general population because my lawyers fought for me to be removed from solitary confinement. So I did have contact with the women there. We did actually, as a matter of fact, we did organizing around bail. And it's so interesting that 50 years later, that remains the issue. And so there were people on the outside, and it was great that the jail was in Greenwich Village because people could just gather outside and you could talk to them out of the windows. And so, and I mentioned this in my autobiography, that when I was in high school, I went to high school in Greenwich Village. I remember walking by that jail and hearing the disembodied voices and not really knowing how to respond. And then it turns out later, I'm the disembodied voices calling out to people to contact an attorney. Or we did a lot of organizing in that way. And we were able to organize the women inside so that there would be collective decisions regarding who got out on bail after the money was raised by people in the community. That was really quite an amazing experience. I learned a lot from. The more I think about it, the more I realize how that experience could really shape me. Later I started to do yoga in jail. I'd never heard of yoga. I mean, there weren't even any yoga mats at that time. There was no such thing as a yoga industry, but I developed a yoga practice when I was there. I learned a lot from the women. I learned about the need for self-care, and yeah.
Vegetarian?
Oh yeah, I became a vegetarian. Not because I wanted to at that time. I'm sorry. I mean, I'm vegan now, so this is a conscious decision. That was not a conscious decision. That was because the meat had maggots in it and was so bad that I told them I did not eat meat. And I had no idea that once I got out, and I tried to go back to eating meat, it wasn't going to work. So,
Yeah, right.
and then eventually, of course, I learned about all of the reasons why we should be engaging in conscious eating and not be participating in the inflicting of violence for the sole purpose of producing profit.
So you're extradited to California, you're in jail, and
This is going to take a long time.
it's amazing
Pretty slowly.
this is the foundation from which, as you're saying, so much of your life was shaped, whether you had wanted it to be that way or not. And you learn that George Jackson is killed. Right? I just was at San Quentin a few weeks ago. One of our fellows at Democracy Now!, she worked at the San Quentin News, and we went into San Quentin, and the first thing the prisoners showed us as we walked in the prison, they pointed and said, "This is where George Jackson was gunned down." The first thing they showed us. This was agonizing for you.
Yeah, August 21st, 1971. George was killed by San Quentin guards, and it was during that period there was so much going on that it was we could hardly find the time to mourn and to grieve because something else would happen. Jonathan had been killed almost exactly a year before that. That period was so compressed in so many ways, and I'll never forget when my attorney, Howard Moore, and my attorney, Margaret Burnham, came to visit me, because at that particular time I was back in solitary confinement because I had been extradited to California. And
you chose to have black attorneys, which is a very important statement.
Well, yeah. Why not? I mean, why? The thing is, there were so many political prisoners during that period, and there were really good attorneys. Kunstler was amazing, right? But there were also black attorneys who were committed, who had a history in civil rights activism, like Howard Moore, Margaret Burnham, who is my closest friend in the world, and we always say that we've known each other since before we were born, because our mothers were pregnant together, and our mothers were best friends. And she was the first person to show up at the jail. And she stayed with me she's the only attorney who was with me from the very beginning until the acquittal happened, which meant that she had to bring her son who had cerebral palsy, and that posed a whole number of challenges. She moved with him to California. I will never, forget Margaret's amazing. You all should know her, as a matter of fact. She's had about 5 different careers. She was a civil rights attorney. She was my attorney for 2 years. She was a judge in Boston. She ran an international law practice. She helped to write the Constitution of South Africa. And now she has a project. Then she became a legal scholar and teaches law at Northeastern. She has this program that is called Civil Rights and Restorative Justice, where she investigates cases of black people in the South who were killed or who had their property taken away from them, who were lynched in Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi, Louisiana. So yeah. So I had 3 black attorneys, and Leo Branton.
And he's the one who, in court, turned to the jury and said, be black for a minute, right? Because the idea that you went underground, he said, you'll automatically think that means she's guilty. But change the color of your skin, and don't worry, you can go back in just a minute. And think what you would do, right? Think what you would do if you were black in America at that time, and the police were going after you, and the FBI.
See, Leo's first love was drama. He studied drama. And so he had this sense of, how to capture the attention of the jury. And many, many years later, we were at Harvard. Charles Ogletree did an event in which he invited me and my siblings and the attorneys. And Leo remembered word for word the closing argument. And he stood up in front of these students, this was in the 1990s, and gave the closing argument again.
Is it true that at one point they sat a woman, a good friend of yours, next to you to show the unreliability of eyewitness accounts?
Yeah, my friend Kendra Alexander, with whom I was active in the Communist Party and a number of other organizations, she did legal work throughout the trial, as did her husband Franklin and my sister. And so she sat at the table with us, and this witness was poised to identify me. And he identified Kendra.
They said, is she in this room today?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there were all these, I guess, Perry Mason moments in the trial.
You were released on bail, but then describe the moment of the jury coming back in. Your family, your whole family was there, but your mother was too nervous to come into the courtroom.
Yeah, my mother didn't want to come in, and Margaret, who had known my mother since she was born, said, Sally, we all learned to call the parents by their first names. That was kind of like a communist. So Margaret said, Sally, you can't stay up. You have to come in. And she came in. But what was interesting was that Margaret was the one who was so totally composed, and she totally had it together. She was the attorney. But as soon as the jury walked into the courtroom, she lost it. Her hands went up. The jury announced the verdict, and Franklin sobbed out loud. You heard this loud voice of this man crying. Franklin was another close comrade friend who did organizing around the case.
1, 2, 3, the charges were read.
Yeah.
And you were found not guilty on all 3 charges.
Yeah.
You walked out into the sunlight, and the next chapter of your life began.
Well, we had a party that night. And champagne, it was great. And then the jurors wanted to get together, so I got to so I actually became really good friends with the foreperson of the jury, whose name was Mary Timothy. But then, the very next day, we got together and decided that something had to be done to keep the whole apparatus together that was responsible for organizing around the demand for my freedom. Because initially it was the National United Committee to Free Angela Davis. And during the time I was in jail, I looked at all of the women who were there, who had no resources, who had no access to attorneys, and I said, this can't just be about me. And so the name was changed, the National United Committee to Free Angela Davis and all political prisoners. And so the very next day, after we had partied all night, we had a meeting to figure out how we could begin to move to a new phase, how we could create a new organization. We created an organization called the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. Some of the first cases were the Attica brothers, because the Attica Rebellion had happened in 1971, September, right after George was killed. There was the case of Reverend Ben Chavis and the Wilmington 10. There were so many cases. Lolita Lebron, who was still in prison at the time. So we immediately, so we immediately began to do that work. And I mention it because, oftentimes we don't get to see the history, the trajectory that makes it possible to engage in certain kinds of political actions 20, 30, 40 years later. And so I think that we were helping to lay the foundation for movements against racist police violence today. As a matter of fact, we had a caucus within the organization that was very specifically concerned with stopping police violence. Excuse me, I have a cold. I can go on and on and on. So
but this is so interesting because 47 years ago, George Jackson was killed, and on the 47th anniversary, this year, 2018, the prison strike lasted 3 weeks from the gunning down of George Jackson to the Attica uprising. And prisoners around the country, once again, in this year, rose up at great, possibility of retribution against them. Went on hunger strike, went on work strikes.
Yeah, that national prisoner strike was so important. We often don't recognize the degree to which the historical memory that I was talking about before plays such an important part in the lives of prisoners. Prisoners, even young people who have been recently arrested and sentenced to prison, are politically educated. They learn from the old timers about all of the events that have happened over the years, the significance of George Jackson, all of the campaigns that took place in the 1960s and the 1970s. They actually do a much better job than people in the free world of preserving history. And of course, the fact that we now can openly call for the abolition of imprisonment as the existing mode of punishment, and the abolition of policing as the major form of security in our worlds. We owe that to people who stood up many decades ago. I'll never forget that.
And just before we move forward, I wanted to go back 8 years to 1963, because this is also another anniversary, and it's close to your home, because it's where you were born, September 15th, 1963, the blowing up of the Birmingham church in Alabama, a church you knew well. You were 19 years old. Where were you on that Sunday when that church, that icon within in Birmingham, was blown up and killed the 4 little girls?
I was in France. I was spending my junior year studying in Paris. And when I learned about the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church, I was there. And in those days, the technology of communication was not what it is today. You couldn't just, text somebody or. I called my family maybe once every 2 months when I was there. And so that was a phone call I still vividly remember. And my mother was very good friends with the mother of Carol Robinson. And as I've said many times, almost all of the girls were close to our family. Cynthia lived right 2 doors away from us, and Carol was my sister's best friend. And she had taken Carol's mother, whose name was Alpha Bliss Robinson. And if any of you've seen Spike Lee's film, 4 Little Girls, she's interviewed there. That was one of his best films, I think. It was really good. And so my Alpha Bliss Robinson called my mother and said, "Would you please take me to the church because I have to pick up Carol, because something has happened there." And so my mother was like there, and she discovered what had happened to her child. We could talk about that incident, but I think it's also important to realize that that wasn't the first time a church had been bombed. Often people who are not from the South don't realize that that was a routine expression of racist terror. It happened all the time.
Didn't you grow up on Dynamite Hill?
Yeah, where I lived was called Dynamite Hill because so many houses were bombed. The church I attended, which was a couple of blocks from the house, was burned when I was 11 years old because we had an interracial discussion group going on there. So, I've said many times that there's all this discussion about terror and the threat of terror and the Islamophobia that goes along with it, but there's never any acknowledgement of the extent to which terror shaped the country, and especially the South. And no one did anything about it.
Have you ever had a discussion with another woman who was born in Birmingham, the former National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice?
Not the one you're talking about. No,
Two slightly different trajectories of life that came out of Birmingham, Condoleezza and Angela.
Yeah. All kinds of people are from Birmingham. I actually did read her autobiography a while ago. And I realized that there was a major difference.
I didn't read her autobiography, and I already figured that out.
But you see, one of the things I learned growing up in Birmingham was to really treasure community. I learned that an injury to one is an injury to all. And I got a sense of, I'm actually really glad I grew up in that segregated world, because it taught me about the possibilities of community. And I can remember our teachers when the white men from the Board of Education would come to school and call the teachers by their first name, because that was one of the ways in which they gave expression to their racism. And so the teachers would stand up and fight back and end up losing their jobs just from speaking back to a white Board of Education representative. And so I felt this closeness there. Now, the reason I make this point is because in Condoleezza Rice's autobiography, she points out that she was reared to think of herself as someone who had to stand out, who had to be better than anyone else, who had to, if we're running a race, she always had to be 5 miles ahead. And, well, we all learn that if you're black, you have to be 10 times better than white people.
So you didn't just face
But
one death sentence, you faced 3.
No, but Condoleezza Rice wanted to be 10 times better than all black people too. So, and I don't think she grew up with that sense that of the power of community. She grew up with a sense of the need to stand out as an individual, and I think that's the fundamental difference.
So you're talking about what fueled the movement for prison abolition while you were so involved, and now the intersectionality of prison abolition, the abolition of ICE, and how actually mainstream that has become, despite the mainstream Democrats like Nancy Pelosi not wanting to talk about the abolition of ICE. You now have people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who won the Democratic nomination in New York. That was one of her primary platforms, was ICE abolition. And it's true now increasingly with progressive candidates who took out more mainstream candidates around the country, and we'll see what happens in November. But I wanted to ask you about Brett Kavanaugh and a poll that was just taken. The poll of who was for him and who was against him. I think it's a Quinnipiac poll. Very interestingly, 81% of the African American community was against Brett Kavanaugh. 65% of Latinos and 40% of whites. Now, we're not talking about an African American woman complaining, as it was the case with Anita Hill. Both people were white, and yet it was the African American community, like with the defeat of Roy Moore, particularly African American women, who said no to Brett Kavanaugh. Why do you think that is?
That's right.
Well, that has to do with a long history of struggle. And I think it's important to point out that black women really play a pivotal role. The black women are the most sophisticated participants in the political arena. Like 94% of black women voted against Donald Trump, right? Whereas 53% of white women as a matter of fact, it's interesting because in the aftermath of his election, they were talking about the fact that the majority of women voted against Trump. And that was true, that the majority of women, but only because black women in their overwhelming majority, and Latino women.
In fact, the Me Too movement, 2006, it's Tarana Burke who coined that term, #MeToo, that Melissa Milano then picked up, crediting her, and said just this last year, tell me your story if it happened to you.
Yeah, and you know, it's not that black women are so special.
But we are.
It's because of that history and that, you know, culture, that political culture that has that black, because when we think about all of the important movements that black people have been involved in, and we look at the fact that the visible representatives are men. But if you look at actually what was going on, the organizing of the movement, it was women who did all of that work, who were responsible for producing that resistance. And I think what is so exciting, I think the last time I was here at Busboys, I was talking about the fact that finally black women are demanding that they be recognized as leaders. And not leaders in the old sense, not in the old sense of the individualist, masculinist, charismatic type leaders, but a kind of collective leadership. And so I was somewhere, I can't remember where I was, but I was in Kalamazoo speaking at an event there, and someone pointed out that this person, I'm not going to name names, was asked, you know, what should we do during this period, during this very chaotic, difficult period? And the answer was, follow black women. If you follow black women, you can't go wrong.
President Trump, how do you think?
We really have to talk about it?
If you talk loud enough, he might hear you. Right? We're in Washington. How do you think he got elected?
Well, I don't think that people in this country had acknowledged the depth of racism. Racism was responsible for the election of Donald Trump. And oftentimes I point out that that is quite literally the case, because he did not win the popular vote. He won the Electoral College, but the Electoral College is this obsolete institution that was anchored in slavery, that was precisely designed to give the southern states with large black populations and small white populations more leverage. And that's why he won. But also by...
Explain that. I don't think people have any understanding in general about the Electoral College, why it's there.
Well, you all know about the Electoral College, right?
I guess it's violent.
Yeah. No, it's... You know that we don't have one person, one vote. That democracy is supposed to be defined by every person's vote being counted equally, but that's not the case. Democracy has never been democracy. It's always been democracy of the minority, and that should be an oxymoron. But yeah, the fact that representatives to the Electoral College get to actually decide who is president, and we vote basically for the representatives. and that completely skews the possibilities that might otherwise. And Hillary Clinton would have won. Not that it, you know, I wasn't excited about Hillary Clinton, but I did believe that Hillary Clinton could have been forced to allow us to create the arena that would have permitted us to do the organizing we do to maybe move on. We need a new political party. I mean, we're not going to move in any progressive direction as long as the Democratic Party is not our savior. I can't believe, I still can't believe, almost 2 years later, I still can't believe Donald Trump was elected. It's like a nightmare. And people all over the world laugh at him. And at the UN, he was laughed at. That was so great. And really, you know, finally.
He said these last 2 years that I've had the greatest administration in the history of this country, and people just laughed.
All of his superlatives, they're so ridiculous.
So, these 2 years are also a time of enormous activism. From the day after the election, or I should say, inauguration, the day of inauguration right here in Washington, D.C., how many people got arrested? And then the day after, women marching all over the country, and in fact all over the world. And then people, thousands racing to the airports when he announces his Muslim ban. And then the March for Science and the March for against climate change. And Black Lives Matter gaining steam all over the country as he talks about, you know, the S-hole country of Africa. His wife now just returning from Africa, visiting Kenya's President Obama's father's homeland, right? This hardly got much attention, but quite something that's where she went as he was leading the charge for
only her fashion choices.
Talk about that. Her hat, the colonial hat.
Yeah, she wore a helmet, the way the old white colonialists did. She looked like a scene from Out of Africa.
But this level of organizing, you go back 50 years, you look at 1968, and you look at today, how does it compare? From the protests at San Francisco State and Columbia University, the protests in Paris and France, the level of organizing, of course, that year, the assassination of both Dr. King and Robert Kennedy, but the level of organizing that took place then and what's happening right now, does this give you hope?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think what gives me hope is the extent to which young organizers have been able to build on the work of those who came before them. And I am so impressed by young organizers and Dream Defenders, Black Lives Matter, Black Youth Project 100, Surge. You know, white people are really beginning to change significantly. I mean, I'm remembering that, you know, it used to be that we assumed racism was just about attitude, right? And so the only way you can deal with a racist is to say, oh, you should go to an unlearning racism workshop. You remember, I mean, this is what people who made these racist statements publicly were then asked to atone and to learn, and there was no sense of the extent to which racism is so deeply embedded in the structures and the institutions of this society. And I think now there is a popular understanding of the fact that you can't just assume that by finding Jason Van Dyke guilty of the murder of Laquan McDonald, that's going to change the situation. The Chicago Police Department will continue to be as racist as it was before. And so this notion of abolition has really taken hold. And I don't envy young activists and organizers, because they have to deal with so much more. Things were so much simpler for us, and that's because we had no idea how complicated these issues really are. I often point out the fact that when we began, when we were calling for black freedom, it was always freedom for the black man. And women were doing most of the organizing. And the women who were doing the organizing didn't even realize that we were excluding ourselves through our very vocabulary from the terrain of freedom. And that's no longer the case. Queer approaches are becoming more mainstream in terms of organizing queer feminist approaches. And that's exciting. So even though I know the world always appears to be so chaotic, and sometimes we can't see a way out. But I think the work that we have to do is to guarantee that we pass down a legacy to the next group, the next generation. And that's our only hope for achieving change. And I see the work that young activists are doing today, and the way in which they also call, because you're not young that long. Many people are under the impression that youth is an eternal. It doesn't happen that way. Before you know it, you will have aged out of youth. And so it's so important to train others to share. And with each generation, it becomes richer and more interesting and more complicated. I am sometimes amazed listening to young activists who speak so fluently about the ways in which homophobia, transphobia not only affect those who identify as trans or as LGBTQ, but it's about the entire world. The challenging of the gender binary has allowed us to recognize that everything can be challenged. If you can challenge what was considered to be the most basic guarantor of normalcy, right? Then you can challenge anything. You can challenge capitalism. You can see our way to a future beyond the kind of obscene capitalist framework that has formed and shaped our lives. So I'm excited. Things look a lot, those of you who are young may not feel this, but things will look a lot more hopeful to me, despite the fact that we have, what's his name, in the White House, and the other what's his name on the Supreme Court.
So as we begin to wrap up, the election is coming up. You engaged in electoral politics, right? You actually ran for, what, vice president on the Communist Party ticket a few times?
Twice, I think. Yes.
So even though you are most known for the kind of grassroots intersectional organizing that you've been describing, these elections are coming up. And how important do you think electoral politics is right now? Do you hold out hope for those? I mean, this record number of women of color who are running, women overall who are running. The fight to expand the voter base instead of restrict it, like the referendum in Florida, that would immediately mean 1.4 million more people could vote because it would change felony disenfranchisement.
Yeah, I think electoral politics is important. But at the same time, we have to recognize that the field of electoral politics is not the only way in which we can give expression to our political impulses. And as a matter of fact, it really militates against the expression of radical politics.
Yeah.
So I can't argue that electoral politics alone is important, but in combination with the kind of radical organizing that will push whoever is elected. I'm most interested in the people who are running because they believe that it's possible to change the world. You know, not because they see it as a way of acquiring prominence for themselves. But I also think that it's the responsibility of those who are not running, but who support these candidates, to make sure that if they are elected, well, first of all, to make sure that they're elected. And then after they're elected, to make sure that they do the right thing. You know, during the Obama administration, we should have been out in the street. You know, we should have said no to his policies on Afghanistan. You know, and we have to realize, and this is a feminist insight, that it is possible to be supportive and be critical at the same time. And I think that's the most important lesson.
Do you know where the Obamas are today? I mean at this moment, but...
What do you mean where they are?
Do you feel that Barack Obama should be out there being involved with grassroots organizing?
Well, you know, he's not going to go back to being a community organizer again.
All right, yeah, no.
We know that, don't we?
Yeah.
But there's work that he can do.
Yeah.
There's work that they can do. And I think that if we are serious about building a movement that can bring about change, and I know that that all the participants in this program, Sweet Honey and the Rock, I don't know if Sweet Honey and the Rock is still here, but they have been so important in generating and sustaining movements. I first heard Sweet Honey and the Rock in 1970, I think it was 1973. When we were involved in the campaign to free Joanne Little. And then the poets, thank you, so much for your spoken word. And Andy, thanks for creating the space that allows people to come together and give expression to radical politics. Thank you so much. And so, wherever you are, you can do that work. And so I hope, I'm not really counting on,
We're not going to end there, we're going to end with the people. And as people focus on Donald Trump, of course, what's most important to focus on are what people are doing all over. And I think that certainly represents the vast majority of people, not what one person does as he gives new meaning to the term White House. But most importantly is you thank everyone, Angela, as you always do. An enormous thank you to your life work, your commitment, your mission, your passion.
Before you thank me, may I say one thing? Because I'm realizing that we've had this entire conversation and it's only been about the U.S.
Well, there she goes. Go ahead, sister. Go
and
ahead.
I'm really, especially these days, I'm super conscious of the extent to which we in this country tend to imagine ourselves as the center of the world. And so there are movements happening everywhere. Look at Brazil. Brazil, I think that the current situation in Brazil has been very much affected by the election. They're trying to elect their own Donald Trump, right? And you see the women's movement as the major challenge to this turn to the right in Brazil. And so I just want to call out.
So you have Jair Bolsonaro, who is viciously misogynistic, anti-gay, anti-trans, racist to the nth degree, said to a congresswoman, "You're too ugly to rape." This is the man who just almost won outright, but is moving into the October 28th final election. And the women who are fighting him, their mantra is not him, as they go out in the thousands. And the head of the Workers' Party, first Dilma Rousseff, the president, was impeached. And then Lula ran for president, was far ahead until they put him in prison. And then a judge ruled he could not run from jail, leaving Jair Bolsonaro. The Wall Street Journal just today endorsed Bolsonaro. From the United States, I don't even know what that means, but they just endorsed him. He praising the military dictatorship of 1965 to the early 80s in Brazil. And this is so significant because of how large a country it is.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we have to be aware of the extent to which the Trump administration has developed even stronger support for Israel. And so I think as we try to imagine the direction we're moving in, and in this country, we have to be attentive to the occupation of Palestine and support Palestine. I think there's a group here that was supposed to come that is speaking out against the fact that the Israeli army continues to train U.S. police departments. You're here. Okay. Where are you? Okay. Maybe you have some flyers or cards. I don't know what else, what do you distribute these days?
And you have the Palestinian mission right here in Washington, D.C. that was just closed by the Trump administration with the support of Nikki Haley, right, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. What the U.S. has done around Palestine, just showing you, I'm sure you may have heard of Angela's book, Freedom is a Constant Struggle, Ferguson, Palestine, and the Foundations of the Movement. What about your decision to write this book and make those links from Ferguson to Palestine?
Well, I think that we become stronger. Our resistance becomes stronger when we offer solidarity to those who are struggling for freedom in other places. And there's so many interesting connections between Black people in the U.S. struggling for freedom, the Palestinians, and one is the fact that these struggles have been taking place for so many decades. In the case of Black people, it's kind of remarkable, isn't it? Yes. That for hundreds of years, Black people have been fighting to be free. Yeah. Hundreds of years. Yeah. And we're still fighting.
Yes, we are.
And in that sense, it's a kind of a beacon for the world that people are not going to give up. The Palestinians have been suffering under the most devastating conditions of settler colonialism. Have had their land, their homes have been evicted, have been made refugees, and they're still fighting. When I was in Palestine, I talked to this older man who said that as long as there is an olive tree left in Palestine, we will be fighting for our freedom. And so I think, we gather strength from those connections. And precisely at during this period, which has witnessed the rise of global capitalism and neoliberal ideology, we have to say no to the possessive individualism that is inflicted on us, and reach out and feel a part of larger communities, planetary solidarity. And I think we can end with the fact that we really will have to save this planet. And every single hurricane that happens is another lesson about the perils of global warming.
Yeah.
And they're treated as if, oh, this is just another natural disaster. So yeah.
And just to say, to comment on this, Jamal Khashoggi, right? Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi columnist for the Washington Post, who just went to Turkey to get a document to marry his fiancée in Istanbul. As she waited outside of the consulate in Istanbul, he walked in and never came out. And you may have heard the latest, we're talking about it every day on Democracy Now! It looks like, as the Washington Post, as Al Jazeera, as Turkey, the Turkish government investigates, that he may well have been murdered in the consulate in Istanbul. It has now been documented that a Saudi jet flew in hours before Jamal Khashoggi went into the consulate. And something like a team of 15 intelligence agents and diplomats went from one plane, and a second plane came in as well. And the only thing they've seen is he did not come out. They see from the closed circuit television. The Saudi government says their closed circuit TV was broken for the day. But it looks like they moved from the consulate to the consul residence right next door, and you see these ominous suitcases being moved out, and it may well be that he was chopped up with a bone saw. And now President Trump and his body taken either through Egypt to Saudi Arabia or directly to Saudi Arabia, just simply not clear, but that same group left within hours the Saudi intelligence and diplomats and got on these two planes and flew out as his desperate fiancée waited outside. President Trump, despite his propensity for tweeting, wasn't saying anything about this, but the enormous pressure that's being brought also by Congress members and senators, including Republicans, saying, if this is the case, we must cut off aid and weapon sales to Saudi Arabia. President Trump just said today, we will do no such thing. Saudi Arabia, was the first place President Trump went outside the United States when he became president, and Jared Kushner, his son-in-law and senior advisor, very close to Mohammed bin Salman. Final words, Angela, as we wrap up, as you move into a remarkable 75th anniversary of your birth in a few months.
I can't really believe that I'm going to be turning 75. But, well, I'm actually doing well. I just have a cold right now. Otherwise, I'm fine. But I think about it in this way. We're not supposed to live such long lives. And I've been very fortunate. So many of my friends and comrades are gone due to state repression and suicides. And I think of myself as being a witness for them. That I'm really thankful that I'm still here and I'm able to witness the fruits of our work. And it's my responsibility also to say to older people that we no longer represent the future. It's the young people who represent the future. And so they are the ones who have to take the leadership. They are the ones who have to lead us into the next phase. And I guess as I get older, I realize how important it is for us to imagine ourselves as something more than our own individual lives. That we're connected with people who came before us, and we will be connected to people who come after us. So it's our responsibility to do the work that will, and the responsibility of younger people too, to make sure that you do the work that will keep the ideas alive, that will keep the possibility of freedom alive, because it's not going to happen tomorrow. We know that. But it can happen. It can happen sometime in the future. Well, I don't think we will ever actually reach that point that we can call freedom. Because what's exciting is that on the road, we notice that things are so much more complicated, you know, and so I'm excited about, you know, what you will discover in the future. No one could have predicted 20 years ago that trans movements would be so important to social justice today. No one could have predicted that. And so I see us expanding the terrain of freedom. And I'm imagining that in the future we will have movement to protect animals that will become much more widespread. We'll have a different relation. We'll experience our relationship to those with whom we share the planet in very different ways. And then there are all of those freedom ideas that I can't even imagine. But I know that in the future, they will emerge. And so I'm excited. It's actually, you know, it's not that bad to be old. It isn't. As long as you maintain that kind of perspective and vision that allows you to feel connected to both those who are younger and those who are older, those who came before us and those who will come after us many generations into the future. So those are my...
Thank you.